Dr. Mariana Sendra, thank you very much for joining our interview series. Let me start right away with the first question. In Sunday's midterm elections, which is widely viewed as a de facto referendum on Javier Milei's 2 years in power, La Libertad Avanza secured over 40% of the national vote, defying expectations amid deep economic hardship, rising unemployment, and corruption scandals involving top officials, including Milei's sister. How do you interpret this surprisingly strong performance? Does it reflect an enduring popular mandate for Milei's shock therapy reforms, or a more complex realignment in Argentina's populist political culture?
Well, thanks for inviting me on the first place. Well, I think these results could be actually interpreted as an endorsement for Milei's government and for the future reforms that at least a part of the society consider are necessary. And but this is not, of course, a blank check for Milei. I think there is an endorsement for some reforms the public think that are needed, but also it was part of a response to as you know, to the U.S. government support, and it was like a prevention of society in order to not generate an economic chaos after the election day, because there was a lot of fear that was actually generated by the government itself and also by the public declarations of the Secretary of the Economic, of Scott Bessent in the United States, that if Milei Milei didn't reach a good electoral performance, as in every election in the Argentina, when the incumbent doesn't win the electoral performance that is needed to have a solid majority in the Congress, all the indicators at the market, like the rates of interest and the price of the dollar, start to rise, and that can generate an economic chaos. So I think, yes, society prevents for that, and they are kind of endorsing Milei to the second part of his term, but not as a blank check,
All right.
Yeah.
Despite economic hardship and declining living standards, the Peronist opposition under Fuerza Patria failed to convert public discontent into electoral gains, securing barely a third of the national vote. How do you explain the opposition's limited capacity to mobilize against Milei's populist neoliberal project? Does this signal an ideological exhaustion within traditional Peronism, or a broader crisis of progressive representation in Argentina?
Well, I think that the poor results of Peronism, or this 30% they reach, are explained that even they are now in the opposition, there is a kind of exhaustion among people who are, Peronism governed for 12 years under the Kirchner's administration. Then there was a short alternation with Macri in 2015, and they came back in the 2019, sorry. And the memory of that last administration is still very fresh. It's important to remember that they were the ones managing the pandemic, and that period left a very negative mark. There were serious mistakes. Even they didn't do bad at the pandemic management, but there were some important mistakes, like were kind of they were especially symbolic for the people. They feel like hurt, for example, the VIP vaccination scandal, or the president himself breaking the lockdown rules within the official residence. And additionally, by the end of the government, Argentina was on the verge of hyperinflation. So in this election, also, additionally to that, Peronism did not present new faces, new candidates, or new ideas, and also, let's not forget that the movement is still carrying the weight of corruption scandals. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner was recently sentenced to house arrest because of that. So right now, what happened to Peronism is that this party, this movement, doesn't have credibility to point out Milei's own mistakes and Milei's corruption scandals, because people simply don't see them as a credible alternative. So yes, that would be the explanation of Peronism in the opposition.
Right. To what extent did Donald Trump's 40 billion bailout and open endorsement shape the electoral outcome? Do you see this as a case of foreign populist interference or a new model of transnational illiberal collaboration?
Well, the Trump factor and the bailout was definitely a significant factor. I think it could be seen as a way of a foreign interference, of course. It's worth to note that this kind of US involvement in the Argentinians' domestic politics, it's only has only one precedent in Argentine history. That is in 1945, during Perón's re-election campaign, but never before had Washington have shown such explicit support for a candidate. Let's remember that by mid-October, the mood inside the government was rather pessimistic because of the corruption scandals, the economy in recession, and public discontent was growing. But everything shift, or at least part of this mood shift, after Milei's visit to the White House, when Trump openly declared this $20 billion financial assistance that was, of course, conditioned to Milei winning the election. And that message, as I said in my first answer, that message, the idea of Milei or the economic chaos, really, I think it really resonated among part of the society, and also the Washington support also was felt at the society, because it helps to stabilize the currency, the price of the currency, and prevented the dollar also from skyrocketing, in the final days before the vote. So yes, it helped a lot, and it was felt like a kind of a foreign interference in domestic politics, of course.
Right. In your recent work on Is Milei a Populist,
Yeah.
you explore the hybridization between libertarian economics and populist discourse. How does Milei reconcile anti-status neoliberalism with the populist logic of representing the people against the elite?
Well, this is a puzzle among my research that I co-author with Hugo Marcos Marne, that we are not yet solving, because I think we need to do further research incorporated on other cases like Milei. But of course, if we conceive populism as a unique set of ideas where the homogeneity of people is a crucial element, this makes us wonder to what extent neoliberalism and populism could be compatible. Because neoliberalism, as we know, has a commitment to dismantling the idea of the people, which is understood as a form of a collective subjectivity that interferes with the natural order created by market. So when Milei was a challenger, when he was campaigning for the presidency, he occasionally refers to a will of the majority when he kind of romanticized the idea of good Argentines. For him, the good Argentines are people who is honest and hardworking, and it's been affected by the casta, by the political elites. But the key point is that Milei doesn't try to speak to the people as a single or an homogeneous group, and he will romanticize the good Argentines. He didn't consistently use this strategy but trying to speak to the people in this Argentinian context would be to direct the message to especially the lower income sectors and trying to explain in them very carefully why public services have been cut and why they're not being benefit from these policies he's addressing is very complicated. So what in this logic, how he resolved this? Well, he tried to present this reduction of public services not as a loss, but rather as a way to make room for individual initiative, you know, for people's own effort, for people's own income, and people's own personal tools and abilities. So the argument is that the state mismanaged the scarcity, so we should shrink it. We should shrink in the state to return power and resources to individuals rather than to the inefficient bureaucracies.
Right. Can Milei's change of policies, mass privatization, deregulation, and fiscal shock therapy be understood as a continuation of the neoliberal wave in Latin America, or do they constitute a qualitatively new populist neoliberal synthesis?
Well, honestly, I wouldn't say that these policies, even if they are fully implemented, can be understood as a new neoliberal wave in Latin America, because today, in my opinion, the regional context doesn't work like that, doesn't operate in ways of waves or cycles as the way it used to be, for example, in the 90s, where there was a clear regional turn toward neoliberalism, or in the 2000s with the so-called pink tide. Back then, there was a certain degree of coordination among governments across the region, and that's not longer the case. Today, I think we are in a scenario where each country is more or less trying to survive on its own, pursuing its own domestic strategy. And political systems or political governments are switching to the left or to the right, but not in a coordinated pattern. Some countries trying to maintain their alignment with the United States. Others are deepening their trade and the economic ties with China. And in Milei's case, yes, there is a clear ideological alignment with the US and of course, with the global far right current. But I would be cautious about calling this a neoliberal way. I mean, we'll see what happens in places like Chile and Colombia, where, of course, the far right is also gaining ground. But again, I don't see it as a part of a regional way.
Right. What similarities and divergences do you see between Milei's governance and earlier populist experiments in the country and region, such as Menem's market populism or Bolsonaro's hybrid of neoliberalism and moral authoritarianism?
Well, of course, this combination of neoliberalism and populism is not new. Latin America, we have several examples from the 90s, as Fujimori in Peru, Collor de Mello in Brazil, and Menem in Argentina, and of course, contemporary examples as Bolsonaro. The thing with these populist leaders in the 90s was that there was also a deep economic crisis at the end of the 80s. And these populist leaders were also able to win elections by blaming the elite for the dramatic situation and saying people was being robbed, I mean, in different ways. However, the main divergence I see, for instance, between Milei and Menem because Milei, it's kind of a reloaded Menemism right now. But the main divergence is that Menem in that time did not develop clear programmatic stances on how to confront this economic situation. He actually never said what he was going to do. And he actually promised some very redistributive policies. Of course, then he switched totally his policies when he was ruling. And that is for me, as an observer of the Argentinian politics and politics in general, it's very surprising. I think it is the first time that the politician announced amazing cuts and adjustments when campaigning. He won. He does what he said he was going to do. He shows even a lot of cruelty toward people who is suffering these cuts, and still has the population support, or at least a part of it. Of course, the electorate is rather heterogeneous, and we should check on the distribution of votes by sectors, because not all sectors are being so much affected by the cuts. Some sectors are being benefiting from policies Milei, but definitely there is people who is still willing to endorse Milei because they have been promised a change, like Menem in the 90s, and the difference is that populism in the 90s this populism, did not, or are not hiding the magnitude of the effort that society will need to do to see the changes. And that for me is surprising.
Right.
Yeah.
The ideological and financial linkages between Milei, Trump, Elon Musk, and European far-right actors like Giorgia Meloni or Nigel Farage suggest a coordinated illiberal front. How should scholars conceptualize these transnational populist networks?
I think that what really connects all these leaders you have mentioned is their discursive irreverence, we could say, or this deliberate rejection at the rhetoric level of what is considered in their terms politically correct. And this use of a highly extreme rhetoric towards when talking about minorities, for example, or when addressing the major challenges that the world is facing today. Because, I mean, we are living globally through a time of enormous changes, demographic, technological, productive, environmental. And what these leaders do is to offer citizens a sense of orientation in this changing and uncertain world, where it's increasingly feels like that future generations will have fewer opportunities comparing to their parents for stability or prosperity. So what they do is to position themselves against those who are decision makers, and they are identifying and responsible for these changes. But this responsible change depending on each national context. So at the same time, Milei's case is very, very particular and specific within this Argentinian economic context, which is extremely fragile, marked by economic crisis and chronic inflation. So I think it's very special, and of course, and ideologically, in the economic realm, ideologically speaking, he's almost the opposite of what we see in Trump or in the Brexit, for instance. While those movements lean toward economic protectionism, Milei is the opposite. He embodies to open the economy, and he proposed an absolute neoliberalism.
Right. Do you see the US bailout and Milei's pro-Washington orientation as a reconfiguration of dependency, what some have called illiberal neoliberalism, in which populist regimes rely on global capital while claiming nationalist sovereignty? how do Milei's symbolic gestures, such as echoing "Make Argentina Great Again," fit into the global grammar of far-right populist performativity?
Well, this is actually a very good question because Milei's ideology is not nativist compared to as the radical right in Europe or in the US. This means that he's not trying to represent the idea of sovereignty or the defense of a national community against an external threat, whether that be immigration or that be the influence of a supranational institution like the European Union over the nation states. So when Milei speaks of make Argentina great again, I think he's bringing back a nostalgic view of an Argentina that we could track to the 19th century when Argentina was at the early stage of the process of state-nation building. And Argentina in that time was a kind of land of opportunities, receiving thousands of migrants that were looking for economic opportunities. That was a very long time ago, and Milei speaks of that, but not in a way of in the nativist way, nativist vision of sovereignty as the radical right in Europe or in the US. We can identify this nostalgic tone, which is characteristic of right-wing populism, but it's not the same. It's not the same.
Right. Given the concentration of power around Milei and his sister Karina, how do you interpret the institutional dynamics of his presidency? Are we witnessing a shift from populist mobilization toward personalized authoritarianism?
Well, so far in his administration, Milei has shown some tendencies that push against the rule of law. For instance, there were some attempts to censor the media by prohibiting the publication of material that was related to the corruption scandal around his sister. Or for instance, through the excessive use of the presidential vetoes after the parliament approved some laws to help people that is suffering from the cuts, from the financial and the fiscal cuts. So that said, Milei is still within the boundaries of the democratic rule. And I think now with these results, having increased his representation from 37 seats to 82 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, and from I think 8 seats in the Senate to 16 or 18, I don't remember well, and with the additional seats that could be provided by other center-right parties, for example, PRO, which has 24 seats, he could potentially reach the quorum and build a majority in the parliament to advance key reforms. And in that sense, I would think that the government is not necessarily moving toward personalized authoritarianism because now he has the numbers to advance key reforms in the parliament. However, of course, because of his eccentric and confrontational leadership style, of course, there is reason for concern and to be alert. Because Milei and his followers might interpret this electoral support as a green light or as a kind of, as I said, of a blank check to override institutional constraints. So we should be alert, of course. Yeah.
Right. The judiciary, media, and opposition have faced increasing pressure under Milei. What risks does this pose to Argentina's democratic resilience compared with other Latin American cases, such as El Salvador under Bukele or Brazil under Bolsonaro?
Well, on this point, I would say Milei's influence over the judiciary or the media is much smaller than many people think because, I mean, it's true that now in his cabinet there is people that is linked to economic interest, and he's now aligned with Trump, who in many ways represents corporate interests, global and financial elites. But in Milei's case, given his background, I see him more as an outsider, which is being used. I mean, I see him as a vehicle by this interest rather than a political actor with capacity to influence major power structures. It's true that he has recently adopted a very aggressive discourse toward the press whenever he's criticized. But we can see that even in the past few days, when Argentina started to face severe economic problems, as for example, unemployment, and with these new corruption scandals around his party that came to light, the main media outlets in the country, the more hegemonic ones, which once treat him favorably, now have started to being critical of Milei. So I don't think his attacks on the media or the opposition will go much further than rhetoric, in my opinion. And of course, this is connected, and there is a reason of that. There is that Argentina society and traditional political elites are deeply empowered when it comes to rights and institutional resources to push back to if Milei were to cross certain lines in that sense.
Right, right. In your co-authored work on presidential approval, tolerant attitudes, and economic performance, you examine how tolerance mediates citizens' evaluation of executives. How might this framework help explain Milei's endurance amid economic hardship?
Yeah, indeed. What we are seeing with these results is that those who rate the president's performance, who rate well his performance, who approve the president's performance and feel he's doing a good job, continue to support him, even when the economic indicators are not particularly strong in relation to unemployment, level of consumption, or the purchasing power. Because inflation is coming down, that is true. But objectively speaking, the government's overall economic performance is now far from solid. And having said that, this group of people is still supporting him, but even beyond supporting him, they are also start to showing, even before the election, they show some kind of intolerant attitudes towards those who disagree to Milei or towards those who do not approve the government's performance. And I think that's very dangerous, and that's very particular, visible on social media, but also in the streets, on social interactions. There is a growing tendency among his supporters to delegitimize or to discredit anyone who think differently. For example, anyone who suggests that the state should take some responsibility of certain key areas is immediately labeled as a communist or a collectivist, and their views are dismissed. And even more dangerous is the idea that these ideas should not belong to the country or should be eliminated. And that kind of reaction is showing an increasingly intolerant attitude. Yeah, and I think that puts in danger what we call the Argentines' democratic coexistence. Yeah.
Right. And finally, Dr. Sendra,
Yeah.
looking ahead, do you foresee Milei's Argentina as a durable model for the global far right, or as another short-lived experiment in authoritarian neoliberal populism destined for crisis and collapse?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, I must say. But in my view is that if over the next 2 years until 2027, the government managed to bring inflation under control to the point where inflation is no longer perceived as the major problem. And if the sectors currently benefiting from its policies, or at least those with stable employment who are not being severely affected, remain being more or a majority compared to those who are losing out, I think there is a quite possibility. It's quite possible that Milei could be re-elected for another term. However, I also think that the consequences of his policies will become more visible in the long run. Perhaps over the next 5 years or so, we are likely to start seeing their structural weaknesses. Particularly, we are likely to see the social costs of these segments of the population that are now being excluded from the Milei's model. And that could eventually trigger social unrest, manifested in protests, mobilizations, and that, of course, will affect and I think Milei's policies will produce inequality and exclusion, but we will see that in the long term. Yeah.
Dr. Mariana Sendra, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.